Good morning, welcome to Breakfast with Charlie State and Naga Monchetti.
So, 11 minutes past 8. We need to be stricter in insisting people wear face coverings in confined spaces. Those were the words of the Prime Minister last night as he signalled a major change to government policy could be on the way in England.
We're asking about what has changed and is this a way of paving the way to get more people back to work? We can talk to Professor Tom Solomon, who's the director of the Institute of Infection and Global Health at the University of Liverpool. And we have Matt Chorley, who's a political commentator from Times Radio. Good morning to you both. Professor Tom Solomon, Tom, good to see you. You've been on this programme many times. You explain things to us very clearly. Can you explain this to me? What should we understand when I quote to you Boris Johnson saying, the balance of scientific opinion seems to have shifted more in favour of them than it was, them being face coverings, and we're very keen to follow that. The reason I'm asking you to explain it is, at first take, it could be, has the science changed, or has the number of scientists who are now saying, look, wearing masks is more advantageous than not changed?
This has been one of those issues that's grumbled on through the whole pandemic, and there's been uncertainty from the start. But I think the evidence has accumulated during the pandemic, and I think now most experts believe that on balance, face masks probably are helpful. And there's been a couple of reports come out in the past couple of months. One was from the Royal Society, which is the leading scientific organisation in the UK, in favour of wearing face masks. And then a couple of weeks ago, there was a letter to the WHO from about 200 scientists saying they're worried increasingly about aerosol transmission. So that's transmission of these tiny particles which could carry virus. So I think the overwhelming impression is that masks probably are helpful.
So what has changed then in terms of the concerns that were raised about face masks, predominantly that people would be touching their faces more and also might feel more secure being out and less conscious of social distancing because of a feeling of some protection?
Well, you're right. A couple of months ago, a lot of this was theoretical, and there was a theoretical worry that if people wore masks, they might feel that they were protected and then they'd behave in irresponsible ways otherwise. But there's now no evidence to support that. The other worry was that because a mask might stop you passing virus on by breathing, but all the virus might accumulate within the mask, then if you're not careful when you're taking it off, effectively you could be putting virus on your hands and therefore spreading it in that way. But we've moved from the start of the epidemic, where it's mostly different theories and people talking about different theories. Now we've got more evidence about what's actually happening, and that's just, I think, shifted the balance of probability.
Matt, very good morning to you. Matt Chorley. So, Matt, I think we can just see it, actually. We can show a picture. I'm sure you'll have seen this by now. Boris Johnson, for the first time, who's out in public wearing the face mask. Now, we were listening very carefully to the professor there. The government says always led by the science. So, we're getting the impression that now the government is saying that face masks are a good thing. And then, again, we go back to Boris Johnson's words. He said, we are looking at ways of making sure that people really do have face coverings in shops. Well, one way to make sure that happen would be to say, well, here's a rule, here's a new rule. But are we in another grey area where he's saying we're looking at it and people are going, well, should I or shouldn't I? Where is everyone left at this point on this particular issue?
Yeah, I think you're right. It's not totally clear, and people just want to be clear. I mean, I've been, for the past couple of weeks, commuting back into London every morning, and I've got my masks, and I make sure I've got them in the... You know, it's when you leave the house, you've got your phone, you've got your keys, and now you've got your mask, because you know that on public transport, you've got to wear them. Whereas if you go to the shops, it's a bit of a mixed bag, you know, and even in different shops, you have some people behind the counter who've got sort of almost full PPE on, and you go to another shop and they haven't. And I think people don't really like wearing the masks. You know, it's nicer not to wear one. So if you don't have to, you're probably inclined not to. But if the government wants people to wear them, they've got to tell them. I don't think, you know, maybe advising it might be a good idea is going to work. I think there's a tension here within the government on the sort of political and economic side. They're really keen to get people to think that life has gone back to something more normal, to get out and go back to work, spend some money, try and support those hospitality businesses and other shops and businesses as well. And I think there had been a feeling that a mask would make it clear we hadn't gone back to normal. So the idea of mandating masks would make it, oh no, actually it's still a bit unsafe to go out. I think there's now a feeling in government that one way, the big problem they've got is that people are concerned about going out, and one way to encourage them out would be to say, look, everyone's going to be wearing a mask. That's much safer. So maybe you can go back to the shops and spend some money.
So, Matt, help us. I mean, this is where you started, really, with your answer. Why is it so difficult for Boris Johnson to say, wear a mask? When you were talking about your commute, I'm looking at those words again. You didn't say to yourself, I'm thinking, Matt, I'm looking at ways of making sure that I wear a mask if I'm in a place. You just said, I will wear one in this place, or I've been told to. Why is there the prevarication?
The law has, it's because the law has changed on public transport. So when I get on the train at the station at the end of my road, almost everyone on the train has got a mask. I get off for Waterloo. If I go on the tube, almost everyone has got a mask. But if I come out of Waterloo and walk into a coffee shop or news agents, whatever, people haven't got a mask because the rules aren't there in place. I think a lot of this goes back to Boris Johnson ultimately is a libertarian. He doesn't want, he was being really reluctant to impose all of these restrictions on people. And he right from early on, do you remember when we had a whole period where we were advised not to go to pubs, but pubs could remain open? And it was a few days before the pubs were actually shut. And I think, he'd much rather this sort of libertarian, just advising people to do the right thing approach, rather than being very strict and mandating people. There's also a little bit of politics going on in this. We've had Sadiq Khan in London, the Labour Mayor of London. We've had Nicola Sturgeon, the SNP leader, First Minister in Scotland. On the whole, signing up to much the same strategy, maybe with a little leeway of a few days, but much the same strategy. But actually arguing about face masks, it is a point of difference. And so I think we've definitely seen that in the last few days. Nicola Sturgeon wearing quite a natty tartan mask, which apparently is sold out in parts of Scotland. Everyone wants a tartan mask. So there's a little bit of politics going on there. In the end, we are probably going to end up in a situation, I think, with masks being mandatory in shops. Part of me wonders why this wasn't done when we were going back, when it happened on public transport, because then that would have just been the new normal. It's a little bit odd now that people have gone back to shops, gone back to pubs or whatever, without masks. To then introduce them feels like we're going backwards rather than forwards to this new normal.
Tom, you were talking about, at the beginning of lockdown, when the pandemic first appeared, a lot of the science was theoretical in some ways. There was no practical evidence. Someone's just got in touch with us on the programme saying wearing masks in shops in England, OK, may become mandatory. So should this also be the case in pubs, restaurants, schools, etc., all indoor spaces? Now, that's the consequence, isn't it, of mandating something, say, in a public space, and people then will naturally use logic and say, well, this is no different, a shop is no different to me being in a pub or a restaurant or a school.
Yeah, well, this is where it becomes a bit nuanced. So we've just heard that it was mandated for public transport, but not shops. But part of the reason for that is that public transport is always in a confined space and tends to be crowded. Shops, some of them are crowded and rather confined, but some of them are rather large spaces. And so I think that's part of the reason why initially it wasn't mandated for shops. But like I've said, there's increasing evidence now about transmission of these very small aerosol droplets, which go beyond a metre, beyond 2 metres, and can be in the air longer. And that's part of the nudge, I think, towards greater usage of masks. But of course, then beyond shops, if you're talking about pubs and restaurants, well, you can't eat your meal or sup your pint through a mask. So it does become tricky. And I think at the end of the day, there's an element of common sense going to have to play into it as well.
Tom, thank you very much, Professor Tom Solomon, Director of the National Institute for Health Research, Health Protection Research Unit in Emerging and Zoonotic Infections at the University of Liverpool. Longest title ever, but we do enjoy having you on the programme, Tom. And Matt Chorley, much easier, presenter at Times Radio from The Times. Thanks very much. Take care, both.